or connect. So we want to just talk kind of honestly about that, about what do we get out of Judges? There's a lot in Judges you're going to find that we should not, under any circumstances, emulate. That it's not an example for us ever. And so
that's the point. Actually, I think the point can be distilled to a single verse. When it says every man did what was right in his own eyes, that's the point of Judges, to describe what happens.
So
the way they're based in
three times we have that statement in Judges, especially they're all toward the end of the book. 4 times, I think it's 4 times, at least partially. And it's the idea that there was no king, and everybody did what they wanted. That's what it kind of boils down to. There wasn't a king to create any kind of. It also sort of illustrates what a king, as far as God is concerned, is supposed to do. And you know, one of those things is to create some sort of devotion to God, and some sort of call people to serve Him, to be His people, as Israel was, and that the king was supposed to ensure justice and ensure that the law was followed, and that God's people retain their identity. And so what you have when you don't have a king in Judges, and you have everyone doing what they want, is you have this sort of sense that everybody is fractured into different tribes or different clans, and there is no cohesion. There's nothing that brings them together as a nation or as a people, and you really see that played out in one story that comes up late in Judges, and we'll talk about that when we get there.
Well, it's kind of like the Wild West.
Kind of, it's kind of,
when it was law and order
kind of the Wild West. It was this sort of, and so we should talk about, when did these things happen? When did the book of Judges happen? When did these events take place?
Well, after Joshua died.
So yeah, very first verse is after the death of Joshua.
He was a great leader.
So when did Joshua die? What was going on when Joshua died? Or what had gone on? Or what place in their lifespan was Israel, or their life cycle? Where were they?
Well, they were in the promised land, so he made it to the promised land.
Okay. They had gotten to the promised land. They had crossed the Jordan together. They were all sort of going to their allotted. Remember, there was in Joshua, there's the allotment of all the tribes. You know, each tribe has certain sections of land that belongs to them, and but there was one problem with that. What was the problem with their moving into the promised land?
People already live there.
Some folks already live there. It belonged to somebody else, and so there was this problem, and it's an issue that as Americans we probably look at and kind of are confronted with our own history to some degree, of coming in and taking land that didn't belong to them. Now God told them to, right? We believe that, but there's still this sort of, you know, moral dilemma that maybe we still feel about how this plays out, what happens as they move in. But that's what we're looking at. That's the time frame. They've come into the promised land that God has given them, and now they have to go take it and move themselves in, and in doing so, move some people out and fight and conquer, and war has to happen, and that's one of the things that we struggle with in Judges. There's a ton of violence in Judges, a ton of fighting and killing, and so that's a a little bit of a hurdle that we have to deal with as we read this book. So,
Kind of funny, guy tried to give you the land, but the fine print said you're gonna have to fight for every inch of it,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. In what sense have they been given the land when they have to go take it, right? And so that's the reality.
Fine print.
That's the reality of Judges. You know that they've been given this land, and we have verse 2. Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands. That's sort of the idea, right? I've given the land into your hands, but you still gotta go up. That is, you still gotta go to war. You still gotta fight for it. And there's some complicating factors even in all that we'll see. So, just as we start here, what are your thoughts about Judges? What's been your experience with the book? What do you know about it? What do you want to know more about? What's where do you stand with this book as we get started tonight?
I don't know too much about half the Judges, and we know lots about the other half.
Okay,
It'd be nice to go read it out.
some of the judges are just kind of barely mentioned, right? They did this or that, and then that's about all we know. And then some of the judges, there's a whole lot more on. What judges do we know well? Samson,
Deborah.
Gideon are the two that often come to mind when you think about judges. Who else? Anybody else? Deborah stands out.
Gideon.
Barak.
Okay, Barak, that's a little bit more of a deep cut, but yeah, he's one of the judges. Yeah, he's one of the judges. Yeah, just not as well known perhaps as some of the others.
Very surprising they had a woman judge back then.
Yes,
Ever.
yes.
I mean, that's total turnaround.
What is surprising about that? Careful now.
She had more courage than the men.
Okay, and that's surprising.
The men.
And let's talk about this. That's surprising. Why?
The men were looked up to as the leaders and the heroes.
Okay.
David and Samson and Saul and all those people, but
She was married, which usually would put
She
you
was
in a
totally
certain-
different.
certain role.
She was married, but was not confined to that domestic role that so many women apparently were in her day. So she stands out in that way as a prophet, as a judge, as a person who to whom people go for advice and for courage and for perspective and for judging, for dealing, for ensuring justice. So she's an interesting character in the Old Testament, in the Bible. One of the few women that we really see in this very kind of formal leadership role. Though, how formal was the role of judge? Who elected you judge?
God.
God,
I mean, God pretty much does, right? And sometimes they weren't sure about that, right? So, sometimes there was even some resistance about that. So yeah, you have people like Samson who who show very little, if any, moral center. You don't have, these are not people who necessarily are moral exemplars and really, great examples for everybody. Sometimes they're simply soldiers, warriors, sometimes mercenaries. In one case, at least, kind of a anti-hero, in a couple of cases, kind of an anti-hero. So you've got these people who, nobody would say, it's not like Samuel looking at David saying, Samuel looking at David saying, this is the guy, or looking at Saul saying, oh, this is obviously the king, standing a head taller than anybody else and just looks the part. The judges aren't like that.
Surprisingly, God is very flexible in his choice of leadership.
Yes.
From Samson, to a much better person like Gideon, who was weak, but yet he was a godly man. And so he's all over the place, kind of, with these judges.
Apparently, God can raise up
He can be flexible.
who he wants, right? As into these roles. And so, and what is the role exactly? What is a judge? It's it's not the guy in the black robe with the gavel. We understand that, right? What is a judge?
Decision makers.
Decision makers, okay?
You would think that, but Deborah seems to be the only one that made a habit of actually judging the way we would think, the way the appointees under Moses did.
Yeah,
Some of the others were singularly ill-equipped to be making any decisions even for themselves.
Yeah. yeah. Deborah is a person to whom people were accustomed to going to find justice, to have cases resolved, she's a person who had this position of influence. So it sort of fits that she's the judge. And when Barak goes to her and says, I don't want to go fight if you're not going to go with me, it actually makes all the sense in the world that would be the case, that he would want that, because that's who she is. That's the role that she was in. But then you get other guys, as Matt points out, like Samson, who nobody is looking at as an example of anything other than he's the action hero of judges, right? He's the guy that tears down the Philistine temple just to set things right. God uses him, and we need to talk about that. What is God doing with these judges?
Basically protecting them from their enemies, which are all around them.
Okay, he is using them to protect Israel from enemies, to deliver Israel from subjugation by enemies, and to sort of carry Israel on to some sort of self-rule and some sort of independence, free of the influence of the people around them.
So it's a wheel rather than a progression.
I was just going to bring that up. In what way is it a wheel rather than a progression?
That's the other point of the book. It seems to be cyclical with people because they're doing whatever they see fit, which often doesn't involve what God told them to do. Make God angry. God allows them to be taken over by their heathen neighbors. This lasts for a while. They get fed up and they cry out in frustration, and God raises up a judge to deliver them. Then they behave under that judge for a time, like they did under Gideon. He dies, then it starts over again.
It is monotonous as the wheel turns. It is this constant cycle of Israel worships other gods. Israel loses sight of their identity as God's people. And one of these people groups living around them moves in and takes control and enslaves them or oppresses them or in some way makes life tough for them. And that can be for years, for decades that's happening. And then God raises up a judge who delivers the people. And sometimes he delivers the people in odd ways. Samson being sort of the main exhibit A there. Samson never leads an army. Samson never, invades Philistine territory. Samson gets captured through his own thick-headedness and is put on display in the Philistine temple and brings the temple down on the heads of all the Philistines in there. And that's how God uses him to deliver Israel.
He basically waged guerrilla warfare, what we would call it.
Well, that's maybe
an army.
that's maybe even giving him too much credit, right? He mostly is just sort of flying off the handle, doing his own thing. But God uses that.
Right.
And that's what God's doing with these judges. He is delivering his people. He is keeping the ship right and headed in the right direction, even when Israel is trying their best to run it to ground. And you see that over and over again in this book. The judges in the book are not formal officials in any way of stretch, in any stretch of the imagination. They are informal leaders that rise up in various places. If you put the time together, if you sort of try to put the times together that are mentioned in the book, the time frames that are mentioned in the book, it's really hard to make them fit. But probably that's because this is going on all over the promised land at various times. There's no indication that this is just this linear story. There's one judge over the whole nation at any time. It's more like tribal, regional sort of situations rising up, and judges are raised up in those places to do what God intends. So
Can you ever figure out who was simultaneous?
I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think there's a way really to figure out, who was contemporary with whom. It just seems, like whoever, in putting this together, there's not a concern for this sort of linear thing. It's just that these are the stories that are told that sort of round out. You've got the history of God's people in Joshua moving into the promised land. You've got the judges, this sort of in between time, and then you've got Samuel and Kings and the establishment and eventual deterioration of the monarchy.
Often they use the word after, though, after so and so, then Israel was subjected to another enemy. But it's higher than both outlets.
Yeah.
Times.
And whether that was across, the other thing to keep in mind is that all these people groups that are mentioned, none of them ruled the whole promised land. It was mostly city-states. You have, kings of cities, and then the sort of regions around, and that's sort of the political landscape. And so when one tribe moves into an area of the promised land, they got to fight a king of a city-state. They got to fight maybe a coalition of kings. They've got to fight because there's any number of kings at any given time in the promised land, and some of them have covenants with each other, and some of them don't. And so there's this sort of constant flux, I guess. So other comments or anything preliminarily?
I'll read you a note in my Bible. You were asking at the beginning of class, how does this book relate to us today?
Yep.
Well, it does. In a lot of ways. I'll tell you one thing. It says, they accommodated lower standards, okay, to solve their own problems. Isn't that what we do in America today? We are accommodating lower standards. Example, homosexual parents, homosexual couples, and the list goes on. So we're kind of doing the same thing. We're accommodating lower standards, that some standards that we held higher years ago. Even when I was young, in the 50s, there's a big change since I was born into this world, 50s and 60s to today. And so that's what they did, and that's one reason they ran into so many problems. But I'm just saying that's something we can look for as we go through the book, We shouldn't be doing that as Americans and as American Christians. I'm not saying we do it as Christians, but as Americans.
It's a sadder book than Joshua. Joshua ends on an up note, and Judges is not as happy.
It's not happy. It's not upbeat. It's not. It sort of gets into the weeds of human nature and our tendency to all do what we want and all sort of follow our own our own moral compasses of our own creation that wind up leading us into conflict more than anything else.
Like political correctness.
It's like the examples weren't there. How are people gonna learn or see or be influenced for good? I mean, you can see the difficulty.
Yeah, so you had Moses, right? During most of the Exodus, you had Moses. You had Moses' hand-picked successor, Joshua. And then who have you got? Especially now that you're no longer clumped together in a huge camp. You're now scattered all over this huge land.
And it seems like their task was to kill people.
Yes, yes.
So it's kind of not surprising that there wouldn't be a moral compass if your task is just to destroy the enemy.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, granted, it was God's enemy, but it just seems like it would be hard.
That's something that's gonna keep coming up as we go through this, like this whole struggle with, what, their mission, their whole mission. We sort of look back at our own history as Americans, treatment of the indigenous people who were already here, and you sort of overlay that on the judges, and you go, I don't believe that's uncomfortable. That doesn't make me comfortable. It's one of the reasons it's not a happy day. But we'll talk about that as we continue. I think there's a way to sort of talk about that and make some sense of that while not at least not dodging the whole issue.
I think that was supposed to be phase one. But their plan is God's people, and they never got past phase one. So we don't know what God would have told them.
I think the book of Judges, primarily, you can see how Deborah, Abimelech, and those kind of judges that come by. But all later, you can see the judges, the main character that came to people's mind always is Samson. Always, when we refer Samson, we refer something like how he rise up and carry things on, and then later, the way he flop up and then betrayed by a woman. And when we come to a Christianity nowadays, because Israel, then the history is they are going to gain a leader like Samson that will come and deliver them from the oppression of other Romans Empire. Then that is what they were expecting, not a leader like Jesus Christ. Not a leader like Jesus Christ. That's the reason why the world kingship and the Jesus kingship being a struggle one, without understanding between the Romans and then Israel. So Judges tell us a lot about history, about Christian and then former Israel together with God. How God always like to, deliver his children when they are going through astray. Because before even the death of Joshua, the Israel starting moving toward pagan worship, which Joshua was not agree with before the death of Joshua. So it became a lot of struggle. So I think we Christians today, when we always take the book of Judges, we have to compare it to Jesus Christ and see how well we are doing today if we believe that God sent Jesus Christ to come and deliver us. Yes, who betrayed him? He was betrayed like what Samson betrayed. There's a little bit difference. So that when we learn a lot about it, I think it will be, after we finish this book, we will have a lot of this thing from it. But I'm very happy you brought it back.
All right, well, let's start reading, and we'll spend a little time with chapter 1 here, and I'm not gonna, if I skip over something or just sort of jump over it quickly, and you want to talk about it more, please yell out and say something. I'm not gonna. I don't think this is the kind of of book that you go through verse by verse and really, but I do want to read it because it's important, I think, to get the story, that we actually read the book. But there'll be some things I'll sort of blip over, but if you want to talk more about them, please feel free. So we start with, after the death of Joshua, as we talked about, the Israelites asked the Lord, who of us is to go up first to fight against the Canaanites? I just think that's an interesting question to start with. Who of us, what? So we're not all going. Why are we not all going into the promised land at once? Why, or why are we not all going to fight at once? What might be the reason for that?
Tribes don't want to keep going. They want to settle on the other side.
Okay, so you've got some tribes that we know wanted to settle on the east of the Jordan, and didn't want to go on through, and that was fine, but there was a condition. What was the condition?
They had sent troops.
You still got to help the rest of Israel fight. So there is a sense in which we're going together, but there's also a sense in which each tribe is sort of responsible for their own thing. And so what seems to be the question here is, who's gonna strike the first blow? Who's making the first incursion? Who's gonna start this thing off? And it is Judah, predictably, because Judah is preeminent in everything, right? And we see that all through the Old Testament, that Judah is always the one that seems to be sort of brought to the forefront. Why might that be? Why is Judah highlighted in so many stories? It's the line of Christ, it's the line of David, it's the royal house that is going to take. So Judges, in the form we know it, probably came about after the monarchy was already established, and perhaps even after David was already on the throne, because you have this sort of preeminence of Judah. But in any case, the Lord answered, Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands. And that's kind of where we start with this thing, right? Yeah, you got to fight, but I've given the land into your hands.
It says his hand. It's not really Judah and Simeon. They didn't come in. They lived a long time before.
Right. It's the tribe.
Right.
It's the tribe of Judah. Yes, it's not. Yeah, it's
Sounds
not.
like
It's not Judah the person. It's the tribe of Judah. And yet, literally, I'm sure it's given the land into his hands, personifying Judah as a person. But it's the tribe of Judah. And then you have verse 3. The men of Judah then said to the Simeonites, the tribe of Simeon, their fellow Israelites, come up with us into the territory allotted to us to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours. So the Simeonites went with them. Simeon's territory was sort of located within Judah. And so it was a kind of an obvious alliance. But it's interesting that there has to be an alliance. That they got to have this agreement reached, right? You go with us, then we'll go with you. Because they're operating as independent tribes. They're all Israelites, but they're also all independent tribes. We see that right down to the time of David, when David rules over Judah for 7 years before he can get enough of a consensus among the other tribes to acclaim him as king too. Acclaim him as king. So there's this sort of sense in which Israel is still this sort of scattered group of tribes and clans, and they have to sort of create some of these alliances. And so that's what they do. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands. And they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there that they found Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Then Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Told you there's some violence and some bloodshed in this story. 10,000 people die in this town Bezek. And the Adonai Bezek is literally the Lord of Bezek, and a king of the area, a regional king, who is captured. And why do they do this to his thumbs and big toes? What's going on there?
Can't find anymore.
It's just kind of a symbolic gesture, right? You know, your days of holding a sword and drawing a bowstring and running around on a battlefield are over. You're crippled. You're not going to be able to do much except do exactly what he said he had done to these other kings: pick up food under the table of this king that he now depends on, or these people that he now depends on. So he's brought to Jerusalem as a prisoner and dies there. It is actually not an uncommon thing to happen to conquered kings in the ancient Near East. Stuff like that happened all the time. Zedekiah, or King Zedekiah of Judah, was blinded at the end of his life and taken to Babylon, where he was sort of dependent upon the king of Babylon for the rest of his life. So they take him to, where do they take him?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because didn't David conquer Jerusalem? What's going on there? Probably Jerusalem had changed hands several times, and probably until David really conquered the city, it was not a fully under full Israelite control. But apparently it's under some of Israelite control here, because they attack it. The men of Judah attack and put the city to the sword and set it on fire. After that, they go down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev and the western foothills. They advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, and defeated Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there, they advanced against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sefer. So you see the Kiriath, by the way, is a Canaanite word for city. And so there's old names for these cities and then new names for these cities in some cases. What was Jerusalem called before David conquered?
So it was King Salem, right?
Yes, Salem, and there was a Jebusite city. The people that lived there were the Jebusites, and David renamed it in some way. So verse 12, and Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Aksah to him in marriage. Who's Caleb? All of a sudden he just pops up here. Who's Caleb? Caleb was one of the spies, right? He and Joshua were unusual. They represented their tribes. There were 12 spies, each representing one of the tribes that first went into the promised land to spy it out. Caleb and Joshua, representing their tribes, had a different opinion than the other 10. What was their different opinion?
We can take it.
We can do this. This is doable. The other 10 said, no way, let's find somewhere else. And both Joshua and Caleb said, if God's with us, we can take it. And their reward is they're the only two of the spies that get to live to see it. Caleb's got to be getting up there. But Caleb's also the guy who, shook his old gnarled hand and said, give me this hill country. and went and took it, because he wanted that hill country. But here Caleb asks for a little help, and he gets it from this guy Othniel, and Othniel gets Caleb's daughter. Caleb, interestingly, was a Kenizzite. The Kenizzites were Edomite, of Edomite ancestry, meaning they came from Esau. So Caleb wasn't even originally a full-blood Israelite. Descendant of Jacob. He was a descendant of Esau, which is interesting, though he long ago sort of cast his lot, I guess. Then there's this little interesting story where one day she came, the daughter, Axa, and there's a little bit of an uncertainty about the translation here. NIV has one day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" And she replied, "Do me a special favor, since you've given me land in the Negev, the desert, the southern part of the country. Give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. A little bit of a translation uncertainty there. It seems like it would make more sense that she's the one who urges her father to give the land, and that's a possible translation. The NIV says that she tried to get Othniel to get her father to give them land, and then it just goes right to her getting off the donkey and asking Caleb for this further favor. In any case, they have this land in the Negev, and they also now have these springs of water, which water is important in the desert. The descendants of Moses' father-in-law, the Kenites, went up from the city of palms with the people of Judah to live among the inhabitants of the desert of Judah and the Negev near Arad. Then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. Therefore it was called Hormah. Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, each city with its territory. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had chariots fitted with iron. We'll talk about that. So this is just what we do. This is a prologue. And what you see is Judah sort of systematically conquering city after city after city, taking this land that God had given to them, and destroying cities, putting people to the sword, and cutting thumbs and toes off kings, and parceling out land and creating these alliances, and it all goes well. They take some cities that you don't know much about. We don't know much about. They also take Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, which Gaza kind of jumps out at you at this point in history, doesn't it? As one of the places that Judah conquered. Gaza later would become Philistine territory, and by the time of David, it was no longer under Israelite control; it was under Philistine control. Well, Ashkelon and Ekron as well, two other Philistine cities. But you see, the Lord was with the men of Judah. But so let's talk about that just for a second. The Lord was with them, but
Redefined him.
So what's going on here? Is God with them or not? If he is, why do the chariots fitted with iron? Probably means chariots that have iron reinforcements on the wheels or other places on the body. Literally, I think this is iron chariots. Some in English translations call them iron chariots, but I hate to be the poor horses had to drag iron chariots around. So it probably has to do more with reinforcing the wheels or other parts with iron. So why did the iron chariots get in God's way, apparently?
Oh, just a temporary setback, I mean.
Temporary setback? I think you could create a pretty good sermon, right? That the Lord was with them.
Well, ultimately, they're gonna get it. They're gonna get
The Lord was with them, but I mean that's kind of our own experience sometimes. God is with us, but
we experience setbacks.
and that's one of the things we see here in these stories. That though God is with them, it is not this straight line. And it depends on some other things. And we'll talk some more about those other things.
They were powerless. So, I mean, because if you're on a chariot with horses, you can be run down. They were fast, and I imagine they were on foot.
Yeah, but there certainly are times in Israel's history when God has saved them from the, remember Pharaoh and his army had chariots, and as they
Yeah.
tried to run Israel down through the Red Sea, that didn't work out so well for them. The chariots became a hindrance, in fact. It's not the only time either that God had chariots stuck. So I guess my point is, certainly God could overcome iron chariots, right? So what's going on here? Why didn't he? Again, it's not this straight line. And God's work in our lives isn't always a straight line either, for various reasons that we will talk about quite a lot as we read this book together.
Maybe he didn't want them to have a route, you know, come right in, run over everything, take everything over. That might be the pride. So maybe he's humbling them a little bit by slowing them down, something like that.
I think the first few verses of chapter 2 talks about how they disobey God. in two
Yep.
different ways.
That's one of the issues. We probably won't get there till next week, but that's one of the issues that that has to be looked at. Chapter 2 begins with a big reason why Israel does not, why it's not always a straight line for Israel. And one of those, the big reason is Israel's disobedience. And we'll talk some about that as well. That sometimes when sometimes God gets in the way because Israel is in the way of God. Israel is not doing what God wants them to do. And you start seeing that now in chapter 1. And it begins with this great, or really this upswing, right? Judah taking all these towns, but then doesn't go so well after that. As Moses had promised, verse 20, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove from it the 3 sons of Anak. The Benjamites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. So whenever this account was formalized or formulated or whatever, that still was the fact. The Jebusites lived there side by side with the Benjamites. Now the tribes of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz, the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Show us how to get into the city, and we'll see that you're treated well." So he showed them, and they put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built a city and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. But Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan, or Taanach, or Dor, or Ibleam, or Megiddo, and their surrounding settlements. For the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. There again, it's God was with them, but the Canaanites were determined. Well, maybe it's not just that the Canaanites were determined. Maybe there's some other things happening too. But they were putting up a fight, and when Israel became strong, verse 28, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, but the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron or Nahalal. So these Canaanites lived among them, but Zebulun subjected them to forced labor. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Akko or Sidon or Alab or Abzib or Helbah or Aphek or Rehob. The Asherites lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land because they did not drive them out. Neither did Naphtali drive out those living in Bethshemesh or Bethanath, but the Naphtalites too lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. And those living in Bethshemesh and Bethanath became forced laborers for them. The Amorites confined the Danites to the hill country, not allowing them to come down to the plain. This is getting worse and worse, right? We've got tribes that are stronger than the people around them and are forcing them to be laborers. But then you got Dan, who can't even get out of they can't even get into the land that they're supposed to take because the Amorites are keeping them in the hill country. And the Amorites were determined also to hold out in Mount Heres, Aijalon, and Shaalbim. But when the power of the tribes of Joseph increased, they too were pressed into forced labor. The boundary of the Amorites was from Scorpion Pass to Selah and beyond. You get the point, right? it starts out so well with Judah taking all these cities, but then the
Wheel.
other tribes are mentioned and
Wheels fall
what's that?
off. I'm sorry, I was just talking to your dad.
Okay, the other tribes are mentioned and it's not as rosy. And you've got them living among Canaanites, and Canaanites, sometimes Canaanite, by the way, is used just as a sort of general term for the people in the land. And it also seems to be a specific ethnicity, but it's sometimes just used as a general name for the people in the land. So you got Canaanites living among them, and they're living among Canaanites. Sometimes they're forced laborers, and sometimes they're not. And it's just this very fluid, very difficult situation. And what happens when Israel lives among the people that God had intended for them to drive out? Yeah, Glenda?
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say. They were supposed to drive those bad people out. And that's the reason things turn, the way that they did, because they didn't do what they were told to do.
Yeah, they do not accomplish it. And we can think of something. Can you imagine? I mean, can you imagine, first of all, how tired you'd get of fighting, right? How tired you get of always being, and you create sort of a place for yourself, and you get sort of settled, and it just seems like more trouble than it's worth to force these poor people out any further, or kill them, or slaughter them. And so you just sort of figure, we can coexist, right? We can sort of live together. And I think that's almost always a great impulse. But in this case, that's not what God intended.
Especially when the population was so much lower. There had to be plenty of room.
Yeah. So it's like, it feels like, well, maybe we'll just live with them for a while. Maybe we'll just pause and live with them for a while. And then things start to happen because of that. We'll talk next week more about this whole notion of holy war. Because unfortunately, that's used sometimes still today to justify atrocious things. So we need to talk about that, just to be responsible citizens of the world. We need to talk about this whole idea of holy war, and how do you know when your war is the holy one, right? And how do you know when you're just doing what you want to do? So we'll pick up there next week, pick up with chapter 2 next week, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why these failures happen, and what that implies and what that means about God and about Israel and about us, I guess. So thanks very much for your good comments, and we will hopefully see everybody Sunday. I hope you have a great week.
You too, Patrick.
Take
Good
care.
night, thanks.
All right.
I don't.
Bye, everyone. Good night.